Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
What's up, everybody? Happy NBA trade season. That's where we're at on Thursday, December 15th. Each year, December 15th is a big day on the NBA calendar because that's when the vast majority of players, there are a few exceptions, but most who signed in the previous offseason are eligible to be dealt. And this opens up trade possibilities around the league leading up to the February trade deadline because, of course, it can be difficult to match salaries, which is required for teams that are at or above the salary cap when close to 40% of the league is untradeable because they just signed new contracts in the offseason. Well, now most teams do have their full roster or nearly their full roster available to trade, and so that can really pick up the pace of negotiations around the entire NBA, both for your Houston Rockets and beyond, simply because there's far more options available, and teams, they're not incentivized anymore to just wait around in hopes that a better offer might come available later. No, at this point, for the most part, teams are able to offer whatever they want, and so we might be getting closer to resolution on a few fronts. Could that include Eric Gordon and maybe even KJ Martin? I certainly hope not with your Houston Rockets. We'll have to wait and see, but that's what we'll be discussing certainly on today's show here at the Logger Line, but also over the next couple of months leading up to the February trade deadline for the 2022-23 NBA season. With that, thanks for tuning in to another episode of our show. Again, this is the Logger Line brought to you by Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. This is the show where I, Ben Dubose, along with my co-host and producer Paulo Alves out of Portugal, talk Houston Rockets basketball every single week. We do it, of course, sponsored by Karbach Brewing and their beer, Clutch City Lager, developed in collaboration with the Houston Rockets. And we also do it with support from Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. And, of course, a partner of this program and the Rockets. Check them out on Twitter at Sports Talk 790. Listen to them at sports790.com. And, of course, Karbach Brewing, follow them on Twitter as well, along with us at the Logger Line. So, we're going to have a roundtable discussion today between myself, Paulo, and Karthik Prasad, who many of you know as Stanford KP on Twitter, talking about the trade possibilities. But while we're getting Karthik ready to go, we're going to lead off by talking a little bit about the on-court activities the last few days, because guess what? The Rockets have won 5 straight games at home now, 3 of their last 4 overall. They're 6-4 in their last 10. So while most of this show is going to be a bit more macro focused, looking at the upcoming trade deadline and what the Rockets may or may not do, of course, they're positioned to have all this salary cap room in the upcoming offseason, so they may not want to be too aggressive. A lot of considerations for Rafael Stone. We'll get into that in a few minutes. Again, that's going to be most of our show today. But I do want to touch on the basketball at least a little bit because guess what? Things are really fun right now. I know the Rockets are still 9-18, tied for last in the Western Conference, but they are playing really good ball, especially at home. They've beaten Philadelphia, Phoenix, and Milwaukee in barely over a week. Tuesday night against Phoenix. Sure, you can point out that the Suns did not have Devin Booker and they lost DeAndre Ayton midway through. However, they did still have Chris Paul. They did still have Mikal Bridges, and the Rockets dominated them from start to finish. Jabari Smith shot well, defended well, continued what we saw on Sunday against Giannis, and then since he didn't have the workload on defense that did against Giannis, the shooting picked up. You'd like for him to get a few more attempts than the 5 that he had, but you know what? If he makes 4 of them, that's 80% shooting, and all 3 of his three-pointers, you'll definitely take that. He continues to rebound at a high clip as well. That's part of how the Rockets just overwhelmed the Suns on the glass. And then Jalen Green, 26 points. He finally had a game at home where he didn't shoot that well, shot just above 41% from the field and just 1 of 7 on threes, but he was still relatively efficient in his 26 points because he got to the line, the free throw line that is, 12 times, making 11 of them. So that's a maturation in his game. And then really the collective unit as a whole, they're defending much better. The first 25 games, they held teams below 100 points just twice. Now they've done it in back-to-back games against Milwaukee and Phoenix. So, Paulo, what are your thoughts on the way they've played this week? This is really, really fun for me to watch because, again, even bad NBA teams are going to have stretches of good play. That's just the way it happens, and there can be some randomness. But unlike this time a year ago when they had that 7-game winning streak that was really led by the likes of Garrison Matthews and Eric Gordon, and of course Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. were out injured for all or most of that streak. This time, it's actually your prized young assets, guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. that are leading the way. So your young players are developing. They're getting better defensively. And for me, at least, this is a lot more fun. The things we're seeing from them are not just short-term bumps that get you some wins in the interim, but things that can make you more excited about their future long-term as well. What are your thoughts on how they played the last couple games?
Yeah, I completely agree with you in the sense that this doesn't seem that fluky, right? To some extent, right, that we've seen the Suns miss shot after shot after shot from three, even though some of them were open, right? We know the Rockets love to overhelp on defense, on drives, and just hope the shooters aren't shooting well. That's the fluky bit of it. But then when you look at the Rockets' own shooting, they beat the Suns and they didn't shoot particularly well. They shot 34% from three. It's not like, as you said, last season, that 7-game winning streak when Jalen was injured, where Garrison Matthews was averaging 16 points a game, shooting 46% from three on 74% true shooting, and was a god in the fourth quarter. Eric Gordon, the same thing. Like, it's not the same. And you've kind of got to pick your poison. Since the beginning of the rebuild, maybe not year one, but year two, and now year three, we constantly say, okay, let's go as far as the young guys can take us. Tanking is good. You want to have the highest odds possible, but the worst case scenario is a scenario where you're winning games because you're getting carried by vets and the young players aren't showing that much promise, or at least not enough promise to win games. Those are useless games. That's worthless. That's just losing lottery odds. And so when you look at this game and the few games that we're talking about, I think there's 6 and 4 in the last 10.
Right.
There's a few trends that you start to see. Jabari Smith, to begin the season, got overpowered on defense sometimes. He, as good as a defender as he is, he got lost in rotation sometimes as well. That's not happening anymore, at least not to the same extent. He's shown, specifically against Giannis, how good of a defender that he can be. And not against Giannis, but the last game and in the few games prior to that, his shot has come along. He seems more confident. We've seen him. There was a highlight play on Chris Paul where he got the switch and he immediately posted him up. I mean, Chris Paul's not gonna defend Jabari Smith in the post, right? And he was really decisive. Immediately went into the turnaround jump shot. You know, that's the things you like to see out of Jabari. And then out of Jalen. Jalen has been just so good. He's improved at so many things. I don't think he's getting lost on defense nearly as much as he was before.
Agreed.
I think offensively, specifically, he's getting to the line at a much bigger rate, and I made the connection that he's getting to the line when the shot isn't falling. This game was another evidence of that. He went 1 for 7 from 3 and had 12 free throws. You know, he's shown flashes of a lot of things in individual games, and you start and we're reaching that point, which is the really promising point, where it's just about putting all of that together. I've seen him improve in his decision making, in his spacing with the ball in his hands. He used to be going 100 miles an hour all the time. Now we see him use the acceleration a little bit. We see him use his agility. We see him contort his body to open up bigger windows for his passes, both on the roll and his kickouts. We are seeing him recognize when he is driving and he's getting past his man. Usually, young guards are looking to the corners and they're looking for the lob threat. He's finally realizing that, hey, sometimes it's just, you know, if you have the ball like at the top of the arc and there's another guard next to you, sometimes the help is coming from that guard, and we've seen him, and that's the hardest help to beat as a young player. Why? Because the guy you're passing it to is not going to be wide open, right? He's going to have a little bit of an advantage because the player helping off of him is the one closest to you, right? So it's less time to recover. we are seeing him make that a lot crisper, and it's leading to open shots. We saw 2 Daishen Nix threes last game, which were largely came from plays like that. And then the other thing that he's doing really well, one of the things that Jalen was struggling with year 1 and even to begin year 2 this year, of course, was that he went at shot blockers trying to get around them, and he got blocked over and over and over again. He would try to outspeed guys and beat them to the rim, and he would leave them too comfortable to block the shots. I think we can all remember performances against Brook Lopez, for example, or Jakob Poeltl, these guys that are going to camp at the rim, and Jalen didn't know what to do about that. We're finally seeing him go to the floater, which is a big weapon. We are finally seeing him, which began last season, seeing him taking those mid-range shots intentionally, not just those fadeaways contested. No, intentionally. If the big is dropping back, punish him with the mid-range shot. That's exactly the shots you want to see out of him. And the other thing is he's finally drawing fouls when driving. He is finally, getting into the opposing team's center, which is something that Eric Gordon does really well, and that I was hoping that Eric Gordon would, teach Jalen about. Is you get it to the shot blocker's body, and all of a sudden it's a lot more likely that the ref will call a foul. And not only that, we're seeing him do that, and we're seeing some acrobat after doing that. We're seeing his touch, and we're seeing him sometimes get end ones that make no sense at all, and that because of his athleticism and because of his touch, even though he's not the most gifted finisher quite yet, we see flashes of just insane finishes. And Jalen is one of those guys that it factor is absolutely there. He wows you all the time.
For sure.
And so because of that is why these wins will hurt your lottery odds, but they're good. Because I don't know if you want to add on anything on top of the game, because otherwise I was just going to move into the argument about the lottery odds.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry for ruining your segue.
No, you're good. You're good. Don't worry about that. I think on Rocket Twitter specifically, there's been, as always, there's always 2 sides, and there's been a side of people that are happy that we're winning, and the young guys are looking good, and then there's guys that are worried about the lottery odds, which is, we've been worrying about lottery odds for 3 years now. That's fine. I think this year is different because it's due to the young guys that we're winning. It's not that bad that we're losing in terms of lottery odds. And why do I say this? It's not like we are in pure purgatory, which is like what the 10th worst team in the league that doesn't get play-in and has the worst odds at jumping up. No, we're currently tied for the 4th worst record in the league. We're only 2 games ahead of the team of Detroit, who has the best odds right now, the worst team in the league. I believe that in this draft, there's 2 top guys in Scoot and Wemby, which to me are generational. And then from 3 until 7 or 8, and I'll fire off a few names because I'm not going to turn this into a draft episode, but Amen Thompson, Nick Smith Jr., Cason Wallace, Cam Whitmore, Ausar Thompson, Anthony Black. To me, these guys are all reasonably within the same tier, and they all fit something the Rockets need to some extent. Some of them are point guards, which is a need that most people identify with this team. The others are small forwards, which is, depending on how high you are on Tari Eason, also a need. If you can get a top 7 pick that's a small forward, you're going to take it, and you figure out how you manage to get minutes for Tari later. Which means that the odds that we're truly caring about are the odds at the top 2 picks. Because other than that, dropping anywhere from 3 to 7, obviously it's better to have a higher pick because you get you get to pick amongst these guys. But in terms of talent, you're going to get a really good guy no matter what. I would argue that most of the guys 3 through 7 would have an argument to get into the top 3 of last year's draft. And so because of that, when you look at the actual odds, the 4th team in the league, the 4th worst team in the league, still has a 20 24.7% chance at a top 2 pick. The drop off from that's only let me bring up the numbers like exactly perfect so I don't mess that up. Yeah. So the worst team in the league has a 27.4% chance. The bottom 3 teams, because the lottery odds are flattened. People sometimes forget that they're flattened also beyond that. It's not obviously quite as high, but it's still very high. The 4th worst team in the league has a 24.7% chance. That's a 2.7% difference when it comes to the top 2 combined, right? The 5th worst team in the league has a 21% chance at a top 2 pick. And so when you obviously want to have the best odds possible because we're talking about generational players. But I think sometimes people forget that after you pick the guys, we're all really, optimistic, and I believe in Joe and I believe in Jabari, but it's not a guarantee that these guys pan out. Mm-hmm. And seeing them pan out, if those extra few wins that you get are these guys figuring it out and panning out, that's better than the 2% chance extra that you get at Wemby or Scoot.
Yeah.
Because those are guaranteed already on your roster, right? And so and considering that the other strong argument towards having the worst team in the league is the floor of the lottery, right? Because you can only drop 5 spots down, and people sometimes focus so much on your chance of getting to number 1, they forget that there's a big difference. Well, as I said earlier, 3 through 7 or 8 is not that big of a difference, at least at this point. This might change as we go through the college cycle, but right now it doesn't seem like a huge gap between 3 and 7. So the floor argument kind of falls apart a little bit as well.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It might make for a boring discussion, but I'm largely with you. And I don't know if we're in the minority, but I think definitely some of the larger accounts on Rockets Twitter are a bit more concerned, and I understand where they're coming from. Clutch fans had a hilarious meme about, fans of Jabari Smith and Jalen Green not concerned about draft picks, and it was basically photoshopping the onion. I thought it was absolutely hilarious, and I do get it. I'm looking up the meme now to make sure I get it correctly. Nothing good comes from losing, says fans of Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. I mean, it's really freaking clever, and there's a lot of validity to it. With that said, where I tend to be more on your side of the fence, I think the situation has subtly shifted relative to the last couple of years. 2 years ago, absolutely, it made sense to bottom out. First off, you could have lost your pick outright to Oklahoma City that year, but the bigger factor was that you literally had nothing. You had no blue chip prospects at all. And so doing everything you could to maximize that draft asset was more important than anything you could do with that group of players. And I'm always, at least on my Twitter timeline, a bit more biased to the present simply because, as Ben Dubose, editor of Rockets Wire, I write these recaps and daily stories that go on rocketswire.usatoday.com. So I'm always tilted a bit more in my discussions towards the present, but some of that's just occupational. A couple of years ago, I understood it completely. In terms of your roster construction, even if you won, that group was going nowhere. But now you've got Jalen Green. Now you've also got Jabari Smith Jr. You've got 2 legit blue chip prospects, and lately you're winning because of those guys. When it was 2 years ago, and maybe even last year when you only had 1 blue chip prospect, it was sort of like, well, if you win, that's great, but ultimately you're going to need a lot more talent. You were also a year ago, and especially 2 years ago, a long way away from potentially having cap space. Whereas now you're only a few months away from having up to $60 million in salary cap flexibility. And the reason I bring up all these other factors is that when we talk about hopefully building this roster into a contender over the coming years, there's not just one way to do it. Sure, you want to acquire more talent, but again, there's many ways that can happen. The draft, free agency. Again, last year for a while, they're for sure going to keep their own pick, but I think certainly it's still going to be somewhere in the top 10. I don't think that even with the recent play, you're not counting on a play-in berth or anything crazy like that. So you're going to bring in one more piece that way. If it was Victor Wembanyama, that would be amazing, of course. But there's all sorts of guys that could really help your team. And if you win more in the short term because of Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., there's clear benefits if those guys are perhaps better than you thought and even sooner than you thought. There's also benefits if maybe you win closer to 30 games this year than 20, then maybe that makes you better positioned on the free agent market next summer to go out there and actually get guys that are worth that $60 million in cap space. And then at that point, you can try and make a push up the standings next year to where that draft asset you're likely going to lose to Oklahoma City. It is top 4 protected in 2024, doesn't sting as much. There's a lot of different ways that you can build a contender. And while Victor or Scoot would certainly mean a lot, it's not the same as 2 years ago when you just had nothing on your current roster. You've got 2 legit blue chip prospects in Jalen and Jabari. You've got intriguing young pieces, guys like Alperen Şengün, Tari Eason. I'm still going to throw Kevin Porter Jr. in there because he's only 22. KJ Martin is 21. He certainly belongs in that group as well. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about this group. And if you went on the back of those guys and not Garrison Matthews or Eric Gordon, then that influences your future in a positive way in a lot of directions. If those guys are better than you thought, that's a wonderful problem to have. Not even a problem at all, but it's just saying problem in the context of your draft odds. If your young players are too good too soon, okay, that's sort of my diamond shoes are too tight. And if you're more desirable to free agents next summer because the Rockets come on over the final 3 quarters of this season, then there's some benefits to that too, because the Rockets are going to be looking to make aggressive moves next summer. We know this with the organizational timeline. So with all that said, I'm not just saying chase every win. No, I understand the lottery odds. I'm just saying it's not as dire as it was a couple of years ago with lottery odds being the only thing. The last point that I would throw out, I know you did a good job of breaking down the odds, and really, if you want Victor, you can be the 5th worst team and your odds only drop like 2.5% in terms of your likelihood of getting Victor. And even the top 2 spots, as you mentioned, you can be the 5th worst team and your odds are basically off by 3 or 4%. It's pretty small in the grand scheme, especially when you weigh it against these other factors. And the other thing is that there's so much parity in the NBA this year. Even after winning 6 of their last 10, 5 straight at home, 3 of their last 4, the Rockets are still tied for last in the Western Conference. There's a lot of parity, and the Rockets can always pull back late. We saw them do it last year as they got the worst record and the floor of pick 5, as you mentioned, by taking their foot off the accelerator. They shut down all the veterans, Eric Gordon, Christian Wood, Dennis Schroeder, lost out those final 7 games, even somehow losing a home back-to-back to the Kings, who weren't really trying. It took a lot of effort for the Rockets to somehow lose those games, and they pulled it off. You can always do that later. The Rockets winning games now in December, and even though they didn't have Devin Booker and for part of the game not DeAndre Ayton, let's not act like the Suns are just a terrible team. I know they've come on hard times of late, but that's still a very good organization in the short term, led by Chris Paul, and you went out there and executed, and it's another feather in the cap of Stephen Silas, John Lucas, the coaching staff, and of course all those young players. They've beaten a lot of good teams of late. The Hawks, although they're struggling as we record this podcast, the Sixers, the Bucks, the Suns. These are some quality teams the Rockets have beaten of late, and there's a lot of confidence. And there is something to be said. The final point I'll make, because I do want to get to Karthik Prasad. We did an entire episode a couple of weeks ago here at the Logger Line on the tweet thread that Matt Moore put out there after the Denver back-to-back, in which he specifically referenced the rot of losing and how some of the issues with the Rockets were, at least appeared to be, somewhat systemic in terms of the development of young players, not being in the right spots, not really having a guy on the court that organizes them, and just overall some of the bad habits. This is how you cure some of those habits. This is how you get young players in the right frame of mind to where they are excited, not just for the games, but to come to practice, to get better each and every day. There's value to that too. And if that makes some of your young players better and or sooner than you expected, that's not all a bad thing, because you do have something of a base now that matters. That was not the case certainly 2 years ago, and you could argue that maybe it wasn't the case last year. Now led by Jalen Green and Jabari Smith, and with the likes of KPJ, Şengün, Tari Eason, KJ Martin as your young role players. Again, I'm not saying that I'm all about chasing every win, that lottery odds don't matter. No, lottery odds absolutely do matter, but they are a part of the picture now when it comes to building the future of this team. They are not the only picture anymore, and I think that's an important distinction. Anyway, I want to get to our special guest. We've gone on about the short term long enough. I want to get to the long term, because when we talk about building this roster into a contender, really, we can talk about the development of internal prospects. We can talk about next summer's draft, but another part is going to be external acquisitions, be it free agents or trades. And that's what with Thursday, December 15th is upon us, not just with the Rockets, but around the entire NBA. As we mentioned leading off the show, this is the unofficial kickoff of trade season because December 15th every year is when players who signed in the offseason, most of them, there's a few exceptions, can be dealt. And of course, that makes it to where teams around the league have a much easier time matching salary and meeting the league's salary matching rules. So without any further delay, let's get Karthik connected and kick off our trade season preview here at the Logger Line. All right, I believe we've got Karthik with us now. KP, you there?
I am. Thanks, Ben.
Yes, thank you for taking the time. For anyone who is listening that doesn't follow you already, I encourage you to do so at Stanford KP. Really sharp guy, Karthik Prasad, who follows not just the Rockets, but the Astros and Texans as well. Good follow for all of Houston sports. Today, of course, we're talking Rockets here on the Logger Line and this upcoming NBA trade season. And the rumors to this point, there's slightly different spins depending on if you follow the local reporting, Jonathan Fagan of the Chronicle, or the national reporting, Shams Charania of The Athletic and Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report. There's been slight conflicts in the reporting there. We'll get into that. But generally, the two names with the Rockets that are coming up the most are Eric Gordon and KJ Martin. Eric Gordon, for the obvious reason, he turns 34 later this month. He's not in age alignment with the rest of the Rockets' young core. This could be the final year of his contract. There's a non-guarantee for the 2023 to 2024 season. So there's a lot of reasons for the Rockets to potentially explore trying to get something for him rather than potentially losing him for no compensation. Of course, they don't want to cut into their cap space for next summer. That's a theme throughout a lot of their discussions. But for a lot of reasons, even though they've won 5 straight at home, 6 of 10, 3 or less for, clearly they're not going anywhere this season. This is a young and rebuilding group. We've known that throughout. And even with this recent upturn in form, they're still that. So if you can get something for Eric as opposed to having him play out the string, and potentially when Jae'Sean Tate comes back, he could be blocking some of your younger guys for minutes, then there's a lot of reasons to consider moving Eric Gordon. With KJ Martin, it's a bit more complicated. He's 21 years old. He's a great role player. And especially if you move Eric Gordon, there's even more minutes and a bigger role for him to take on. It's just he could become a restricted free agent next summer or an unrestricted free agent in 2024, depending on how the Rockets want to play it. And so there's contractual factors in terms of whether they can, they can keep him long term, but whether it makes sense to keep him long term. There were also some reports in the offseason that Martin might want out, but I think that primarily had to do with the role. If there's any lingering uncertainty now, it's over the contract. And so we'll get into that. It doesn't really make sense for the Rockets from a rebuilding perspective to move KJ Martin. There's just some finances that might prompt them to at least explore the market, and we'll get into that. But I want to start with Eric. And Karthik, am I missing anything in my evaluation? Because to me, I know that Jonathan Fagan reporting said basically what we heard last year, that the Rockets want a first-round pick, but there's some conditions on it. They don't want it too soon because they already have 2 picks their own and one from Brooklyn, or one from Milwaukee, in next year's draft. They had the swap right with Brooklyn, which obviously will not activate. So they don't want a 3rd pick in the first round, and they would like it in a future year. Whereas the Shams report didn't have any of those qualifiers, just said a first-round pick. To me, you're at a point now where if you can move him for a first-rounder, I think you've got to do it. Because unlike a year ago, you've now got guys, KJ coming on, Tari Eason is going to need more minutes, that Eric is blocking for minutes. And, it's getting tight now, and Jae'Sean Tate has barely played this season. So unlike a year ago, there's an opportunity cost to keeping Eric. And I know, Rafael Stone could point out that non-guaranteed option, the Rockets could conceivably keep him themselves, and Eric's game as a 3-and-D type might age a bit more gracefully to where he could still be with you a year or two from now when you're trying to start to win. But honestly, that's a pretty remote scenario, and I don't think it's worth planning around. And quite frankly, if you wanted that, then you could still try and sign him. You could trade him and then try and sign him back when he's a free agent with all the cap flexibility that you have. For me, unlike a year ago, there's some pretty compelling arguments now to where keeping him the full season can keep guys away from getting the minutes that they need to develop. This team has enough young prospects now that there is an opportunity cost to simply keeping Eric. And so because of that, I hope the bar is slightly lower for Rafael Stone to deal him this year than maybe this time a year ago. Where are you at on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat, and it's really kind of 3 factors for me that I'm thinking about. One is, to your point, the roster crunch. He's not just taking minutes right now from the few small forwards that we have. You named them, KJ, Tari, etc. And when Jae'Sean comes back, but also you could argue a few kind of guards as well. And so you think about the development of Josh Christopher, of Ty Washington. They're just, that role is actually really critical. The kind of the third guard or the complementary wing around Kevin Porter and Jalen Green. And so it's just a really important role. And I get why the Rockets have Eric in that position right now. But I just think if they have to maximize the development of some of their other assets, they should really look at moving him. The second thing, to your point around timing, his contract is a lot more movable this year than it was last year, right? So I think there's more options. I get the idea of not wanting another pick in this draft, but at the same time, it's a pretty deep draft, and I think that there's going to be a natural drop-off point, and if you can package a couple of picks to move up and maybe into the late lotto, into the mid-teens like they've done in prior years, an extra asset in this year's draft will be helpful for that. So I don't fully buy that they wouldn't take a first round pick in this year's draft, just given the quality of it. And then the third thing is I just don't think he's the right fit to begin with in the starting lineup. Like he's a really, really good player. He belongs in a contender. But on this particular team, our Rockets team that's going through the building process, and you think about what Jalen and Kevin Porter need. I've tweeted a lot about this, like real point of attack defense, someone who can be a complementary playmaker, who can help crash the boards. Those aren't Eric's strengths, at least at this age right now. I think his point of attack defense like comes and goes based on the night. He's not a plus playmaker actively, and he's not a good rebounder for his position. And so it's just to me, if you're going to maximize your assets, whether those guys in the starting lineup or the guys that are currently on the bench, you have to explore other options in that role. Now, I can't speak for all the kind of the veteran presence that he brings and the developmental aspect of it off the court, but I think it's evident that there could be better fits, at that position, and it's time to start activating that plan.
I would like to ask you, so Ben said that they originally they were looking for a first round pick, not in this year's draft. You argued that you would take one even in this year's draft. I guess I'll ask, how low would you go and still trade Eric Gordon? Like, how much value do you place on the fact that trading him would open up minutes for other players? Is 2 second round picks enough? Is 3 second round picks enough? How much do you prioritize the salary coming back, not harming the cap space next year, right? How would you kind of balance that? Because I'll be honest, at this point, in order to open up minutes, not just for KJ Martin, who plays better at the 3, or for Tari Eason, I think trading Eric Gordon might actually open up minutes for someone like Josh Christopher or Ty Washington as that second guard whenever Silas is not staggering KPJ and Jalen. So just from a value perspective, what's the lowest you'll go, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think definitely, the Rockets want less salary, cumulative salary coming back. I think that's a non-negotiable. And then depending on the quality of the seconds, I may be inclined to take 2 really good seconds, or a late first. Like at this point, all of those will be quality assets. And it just, to me, the market for Eric Gordon is going to be pretty unique, I would say. Not everyone's going to line up to trade for him, right? You have to be probably one of the top 8 teams, probably someone who has like a lead guard who knows that Eric can space the floor for, probably a team that could use Eric as like one of their top 6 players, right? So I don't expect, it's not a very liquid market, so to speak, right? There's not just a bunch of teams who would say, hey, yes, let's give me Eric Gordon, I'm ready to feature him and make another push. And so given that, I don't think we can be too choosy. And I think it's at this point, you take some good positive assets, you limit the salary coming back, create some flexibility there. And then to your point, you open up roster spots and playing time for both the guards and the wings.
Yeah, just one thing, Ben, before you ask another question. I think you at the end there, you made a really solid point, which is $19.5 million is not that easy to match. And usually teams don't have, that much salary in one player as an expiring. That would be pretty rare to trade straight up for Eric and add whatever assets are on top. There's we're not in the offseason anymore, so there's no extra roster spot,
Correct.
for trades. In a scenario,
you could let Boban go if you need to, but yeah, it does get tricky.
Yeah.
It gets tricky because you only have, Matthews is in the rotation. Bruno is in the rotation. The only guy that's not playing at this point, that's not on a rookie contract, is Boban. Perhaps, depending on who comes back, maybe Leishan is expendable, but it's fairly hard because of how many valuable players we have.
Yeah, to do anything more than 2 for 1 is difficult. 3 or 4 for 1 gets really, really difficult. And of course, that does make the math a lot more complicated. It's not like the Tice deal a year ago where you could easily take back, 3 salary spots the way they did with Schroeder, Fernando, and Enes Freedom, who they immediately, God, I hate calling him Enes Freedom, but whatever. He was a Rocket for like 2 minutes, and Twitter got off their jokes, and then he was no more. But yeah, the point is they could actually make that work a year ago, whereas now there is a crunch. I'm right there with you. The other thing that I think Karthik made a very valid point about was the strength of the 2023 draft class, and that's why I do think there could be something to the Shams reporting of just any first-round pick as opposed to the Fagan version of it being similar to a year ago with wanting a future pick. Because with a draft that's this strong, even if the Rockets don't want 3 more rookies, they could easily roll over that pick. I think this year's draft with the depth in it, it'd be pretty simple. If you wanted to sell that off to say, hey, this pick in the late 20s, I'll give it to you if you give me, a future pick or a future couple of seconds that are likely to be high in the order. It would not be that difficult to move off that pick in what's supposed to be a pretty strong draft. So that's why I tend to think that any first round pick, they should probably take it. And don't even worry at all about whether it's a win or a loss for Rafael Stone. We went into this last time. I think so many people on Twitter are overly focused on just the volume of wins and losses when they should be, and when I say wins and losses, I mean from a GM's perspective, when they should be on the magnitude. Whether Eric Gordon maybe could have gotten you a pick closer to 20 or 22 a year ago, or if it's 30 or 32 this year, something like that, that's relatively small in terms of what it means for your rebuild. Don't get bogged down of, did Rafael Stone win or lose this trade? No, if he can move Eric Gordon for a satisfactory return and not harm much, if any, their salary cap flexibility next summer, and thus free up minutes in the short term as well for guys like Tari and KJ, and perhaps a role for Josh Christopher as well, I think it's a clear win. And so to me, that's the assignment. We'll see if Rafael Stone can execute it. I know that right now the posturing is out there that they're not really looking to move him. Again, I think a lot of that's posturing, and I think that's going on all around the league. Trade season is starting, and it goes on for 2 months, and so a lot of what you see now is sort of the initial take, and then teams move off that as they get closer to the deadline. The Rockets did not a year ago, but again, the circumstances were very different. It's easier to move Eric Gordon this year, and there also wasn't nearly the congestion in terms of the roster crunch this time a year ago. There are these factors now, and so because of that, I think and hope Rafael Stone will move off his position a bit more as we get closer to February 2023. Anyway, I want to transition to the more interesting discussion, which is KJ Martin, because on paper, there's no reason to consider trading him at all. He's 21 years old. He's not quite as plug and play as Jabari Smith, but in my opinion, he's pretty close. He makes sense in a lot of constructs because he can make an impact without the ball. His shooting has gotten to at least a passable level. He helps you as a rebounder. He's a pretty versatile defender, one of the most athletic players in the league, plays so well with Jalen Green. And of course, their chemistry off the court is very important as well. I honestly think that's Jalen's closest confidant on the entire team from what I can tell and from everything that I've heard. So there's a pretty compelling case to keep KJ around. You're a rebuilding team. He's 21 years old. He's showing flashes. If you move Eric Gordon, you can easily make KJ Martin a starter. That's what you're trying to do with any draft pick you might hypothetically acquire for KJ Martin. You want a player that's like KJ Martin, and he's already in perfect age alignment. So at face value, there's no reason to consider making a move. Yet we know why the talk is out there. In the offseason, he reportedly asked, or at least inquired about a potential trade. He was uncertain about his role, especially with the Rockets getting 2 rookie forwards, Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason, that could eat into his minutes. He's found a role this year. Ideally, he would be a starter. But for now, he's playing well as a sixth man, getting about 25 minutes a game, and is clearly helping this team win. And hopefully, again, he will be a starter if and when they move Eric Gordon. Of course, Steven Silas could make that move even before. We'll have to wait and see. Not going to do anything now with them winning, but who knows if they go through another downstretch. That's certainly a lever they could pull. And we have seen, by the way, Steven getting a bit more aggressive in recent games, playing KJ with the starters at times, not starting the game with them, but we've seen lately, finishing a quarter or a half from time to time, the four other starters surrounded by KJ. So I think it's something that they're gradually gravitating to. With that said, the reason the rumors are out there, it traces back to the summer, and even now he's still not starting. Eric Pincus of Bleacher Report reported today that he had multiple sources saying that he believes that KJ is still interested in potentially leaving. Now, we should point out that the Rockets have no direct incentive to comply. Of course, he's under contract, and he's clearly not a malcontent. As someone that's in the locker room, I can tell you that he's a joy to be around. He's in a great mood every single day. His teammates love him. I have not seen anything that suggests that his effort has waned, anything like that. No, he seems quite happy and having a really good season in a lot of ways. But I think the reason for the uncertainty, besides, can he maybe start and get 5 more minutes? I'm sure he thinks he deserves it, and he probably does, especially on this team. It's also about the contract, because he could be a restricted free agent this summer or an unrestricted free agent a year from now, or a year and a half from now in 2024. It's sort of similar to the Jae'Sean Tate dynamic. Do you potentially try and put him into restricted free agency, use some of your cap room next summer to get him a friendlier deal long term? There's a lot of ways that you could potentially play this, but because of that uncertainty, the Rockets do have a decision to make in the fairly near future about how and where he fits into their long-term plans, because he's not going to be at the bargain basement contract below $2 million a year that he is right now. He's going to get a bigger deal. The question is just when and how much, and does that fit? My personal opinion is that it should, because really you're not going to have to worry about the raises to Jalen Green or Jabari Smith Jr. until really the mid to late 2020s. You still got a few years on that. And you have to remember that in the 2024 to 2026 range, with your future draft assets headed to Oklahoma City, it's not like the Rockets are going to be in a position to where, hey, you might consider rolling over KJ Martin, the asset, into a younger player, because you're going to be trying to win right then and there. Part of the advantage of sort of rolling over the asset, part of the case for that is, well, it might help you bottom out a bit more in the short term and continue collecting assets. That's not really the case. The Rockets have a pretty clear organizational incentive starting in 2024 to really try and make a push up the standings, and KJ is in age alignment with that. There's also a good shot that you end up using all or some of your financial flexibility this summer, be it free agent signings, trades, whatever it may be, so that when you give KJ Martin that deal, you're adding on KJ Martin as opposed to eating into your cap space. So because of that, unless KJ is behind the scenes, unless KJ and his reps have given you an indication that they're looking for some deal that financially is just completely out of alignment with what he's looking for, I'm compelled to just stay the course and say, hey, we'll deal with that when it's time, because he's in perfect age alignment. And of course, on the court, the fit is really good. I get why KJ wants a resolution, because, for KJ and his agent, the sooner they can sort of leverage the Rockets into an extension, the better. The sooner he can get a guarantee, the less he has to worry about, one freak fall and all of a sudden he blows out an ACL, something like that, and his outlook materially changes. The sooner he can get a deal, the better. I think that's why KJ and his team are sort of pushing this to the forefront, be it with the Rockets or somebody else. It can get him that next contract sooner, which is good for him. But ultimately, from a Rockets perspective, I just don't see, unless the pick asset is really, really good. If somebody's willing to give a lottery pick for him, especially a top 10 pick, would I be open to it? Hypothetically, sure, because for all the good things we can say about KJ, I don't think he has star upside. He's not that type of playmaker, shooter, or shot creator. So if you could hypothetically get a lottery pick in a strong 2023 draft, would I do it? Probably. But I just don't see where that would come from, because most of the other teams that are confident they're going to be in the lottery this year, guess what? They need that star upside too. The types of teams that would be interested in KJ, and it's been reported pretty well, for example, that Phoenix is one of them, are teams that know they're going to be in the playoffs and have a shot to contend this year. And so they just don't have the type of pick asset that would tempt me at this point in time. So that's why it's tough for me to see a deal getting to the finish line. I understand KJ and his team, pushing this to the forefront for a lot of reasons. And I think it would be a mistake for Rafael Stone not to listen. He's not a star, so you certainly don't need to say he's untouchable. He's not that type of player, but it's just really tough when I look at the dynamics to see what the pathway to a deal would be. Am I missing anything, Karthik? Because when I look at the situation, I just don't see a scenario, a realistic one that is, where it makes sense for the Rockets to deal KJ by February.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, this is all kind of contract related posturing and negotiations through the media, as far as we can tell, and everything we've been told on and off the record. Right? I think like if you look at his contract, just to make sure everyone's aware, it is non-guaranteed for next year, right? It becomes fully guaranteed basically this summer by default. And then of which in the summer, the following summer, he could be a restricted free agent. And so, to your point, like there's a lot of uncertainty on his deal. And I think this is just kind of, to your point, forcing the action. And as long as, they're keeping KJ happy on the court, I think it's, this should come to a resolution. But it could come in a couple of ways. One, as we've said, Eric gets traded. KJ kind of steps into the starting role. Two, they independently or in conjunction guarantee his next year to kind of say, hey, we're behind you. Let's extend the window. Let's like hammer out an extension. And so there's a lot of different levers I think they could pull. So it doesn't scream like this is an urgent situation that needs resolution and it's going to lead to KJ being shipped out the door. Now, to your point, he is a great asset. And whether it's a lottery pick or, for example, as part of an Eric Gordon deal, you actually, by including him, get somebody back with star upside. I just don't see very many of those possibilities. And so that's why I just think that I'm in full agreement with you that this feels just like agent doing their job to create enough kind of market pressure so that the Rockets, act sooner versus later, whether that be at like, starting him and or guaranteeing his contract and or coming to the negotiation table on a longer deal.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. I think it's also important to notice that KJ has value to this team that he likely doesn't have to other teams because he's been here for so long, because he seems to be one of the locker room guys, because he has a good relationship, it seems, with a lot of the guys that have come after him. He is, along with Jae'Sean Tate, when Eric Gordon gets traded, of course, the longest tenured Rocket on the team, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. And that has value, especially as a young guy. He is the same age as Tari Eason. And it is also important to realize that on the court, there's a lot of value that is placed on star potential. But while stars are rare, it's also rare to find a role player that fits perfectly. For example, Robert Covington fit perfectly with what the Rockets needed from him when he was here. And ever since then, he's been on two teams where, well, he doesn't even play for the Clippers anymore. And with the Blazers, he was playing well, but it wasn't like we were not talking about him in the sense of, oh, this is one of the best role players in the league. KJ Martin is a little bit of that with the Rockets in specific, because we know the chemistry he has with Jalen Green in the pick and roll. It's not often that you see a player that is, if his shot improves a little bit more from what it has been this season, he's the perfect off-ball player. He can play the pick and roll. He can space the floor. He's a lob threat. It's not. Yeah. He's switchable across multiple positions on defense. A lot of it comes from his athleticism, and there's concerns there. I think Ruth usually points this out with a player that athletic. If maybe his career isn't as long as you'd expect, but he's still 21. I don't think his career is ending any time near 30 at the very least with his athleticism. And so I guess the question becomes, since he has so much value to the Rockets over someone with a similar skill set that hasn't been here for as long as he has, and taking into consideration that this looks like a posturing or a leverage move from him and his agent when it comes to an extension, where would you place? Like, what would be your lower end and higher end that you'd go on a KJ Martin extension, both on AAV and on years? For context, I can provide for example, I think Lou Dort is someone who is comparable, not at the same position, but is comparable as a good role player who has been with the Thunder since, well, before they rebuild, and is now transitioning into a valuable piece for them in this next era of the team, right? He got 5 years with the team option at the end, 15 million, 15 million, 16 and a half, 17, 17.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, if KJ takes that, I'm pretty comfortable with it, especially with the cap space going up. But how would you feel about it, just from a floor and a ceiling standpoint, on what you'd give KJ on an extension?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. I think somewhere, the floor is probably the non-tax MLE, and then I think the ceiling is probably that mid-teens number. I think a 3 to 4 year deal makes sense for that reason. And I think about it, yes, cap space is going up, and what that means is the league average salary is going to go up too. And so, and we talked about this as part of the Kevin Porter negotiation, as that was unfolding, that a mid-teen salary isn't as crazy as it used to be, because that in a year or two will be the league average salary, right? And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it just means that you're extremely movable because, on average, every other player is kind of in your salary range. And two, it also kind of creates some value to the assets that we've had. I mean, you can look at what Brooklyn did and the number of kind of similar mid-tier contracts that they're able to cultivate as they quickly rebuilt between their eras. So yeah, I'm with you. I think something in like the $13 million range, plus or minus two, for I think 4 years makes sense. But I think given what the Rockets have done, a couple of options here and there to make it more team friendly and make it less of like a potential bad contract should KJ get hurt or something, feels like the answer. I'm sure there's a number in KJ's head of like the kind of security he's looking for. And so similar to what I said around Kevin Porter, I think there's so much win-win value. We have the most information on KJ, to your point around the value. His fit here is impeccable. He looks great on the court playing for the Rockets, right? And so we know how to maximize his value, and we also know what his value is. And so I think, just like Kevin Porter, I think a deal gets done. And this one, I think, has probably less year-over-year options, but more kind of anchored towards a really good movable salary with a decent guarantee to give him the kind of security he's looking for.
I want to close out by asking you about the rest of the roster, because I find this very interesting. I think most people look at the Rockets situation, and superficially, this is correct. The Rockets don't really have an incentive to make a big move because they don't want to disrupt the cap space that they're projected to have next summer. You don't want to eat into that $60 million, and you want to be very careful with anything you take back that's more than 1 year. And so in those situations, it's easy to say, stay the course. But I do think that this team is low-key in a spot where they might consider a sell-off of a couple of players for future draft assets. You're already dealing with a rotation crunch as it is. And then in the summer, when you add on, be it free agents, trades, however you use that financial space, as it stands, you would be using that and bringing in players on top of what you already have, because most of the current group is under contract going forward as well. So when you look at guys, I'm going to use an example, Josh Christopher. If you're concerned about his long-term fit, and maybe you feel like you're going to go into the point guard market in free agency because you have this space, and we've talked ad nauseum about Kevin Porter Jr. clearly not being a true point guard and potentially moving him to some sort of wing or sixth man role in the future, then if Josh Christopher's minutes are going to get crowded out by a veteran point guard acquisition over the summer, does it perhaps make sense for you to explore a Christopher trade now when the team acquiring him would have him at a younger age, more contractual control? His value would probably be more now than it would be in the summer So it might make sense to look at it proactively. Not saying that they for sure should with him. I'm just using it as an example. I think you could also make an argument, and it's sort of delicate because he signed a new contract, but I wonder about Jae'Sean Tate long term too. I know he just signed a contract and he's beloved in the locker room, but if you really believe in KJ Martin, and I do, and his long term fit, and so especially if you give KJ that type of extension that you just talked about, and you start looking at where he can fit long term, perhaps even as a 30 minutes per game starter, does that not eat into how you can use Jae'Sean Tate, especially because you also have the likes of Tari Eason and Jabari Smith at the forward spots? So maybe it makes sense for you to trade Jae'Sean at the front end of his contract when he'd have the most value. I know that's tricky now because he's barely played due to the injury, but let's say he comes back, plays well, and you could hypothetically trade him to a destination that he's comfortable with, i.e. it's not like you're shipping him to Siberia shortly after signing a new contract, which would build you bad will in the agent community. We know that's a priority for Rafael Stone. I could see a hypothetical where it might make sense to move Tate as well. And, you can go up and down the roster. The bottom line, and Paolo has made this argument before, is that you've got to make a decision long term about where some of these younger guys fit, because some of these roles are going to get filled by the players you sign or trade for with that cap flexibility next summer. And if that's the case, you may have more value. You may get more value for them now than by waiting until the summer when everyone knows that you're desperate and they're 1 year closer to their contracts being up. So low key, I could see some surprising things, not because the Rockets are trying to trade for an asset. It wouldn't be like you're trading them for players that would help you now. But if you can get some sort of future draft asset and it helps you clear the books for this summer, then to me, there's some intriguing things that you could look at there. Not saying that I expect any of that, but I could at least see it considered as the Rockets get closer to the 2023 free agency period. And of course, this deadline is one of the last transaction windows up until that, because from February until May, there's pretty much nothing you could do. So my guess is that, pardon the pun, Rafael Stone leaves no stone unturned as he goes through this roster. And you could see some things that seem a little bit surprising. Karthik, what are your thoughts on that? Is there anybody in particular that when you look at the rest of the roster stands out to you as a potential trade candidate?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. One, I think, Josh Christopher is in that bucket. And then the other two, if you look at Garrison Matthews and Daishen Nix, their contracts are actually pretty interesting, just given the way that they're structured with the number of guarantees versus non-guarantees and options. Right, and they, to your point, are in the backcourt.
And Matthews is the kind of guy that, contenders always want an extra shooter. He's the type of guy that could easily get dealt as, a poor man's 3-and-D guy, I guess. Yeah. Guys like that get dealt to the deadline for second rounders all the time.
Yeah, and it's so there's a couple things. One, I think there's a few of those guys. I actually like Gary Bird's fit in terms of what we're trying to do, so he can play multiple positions. But I put Nix, I put Christopher, to your point around Tate, in this category of you should make a decision on, do you want to continue investing in them? I think Tate's interesting because I almost view kind of Eric Gordon's role on the team and Tate's as kind of the same. And so it's, it makes me wonder that, let's say they do move Eric Gordon, whether Tate kind of gets an opportunity alongside the starters and running the bench unit to kind of showcase his value in more of like a connecting wing type of role. He's interesting because, unlike Eric Gordon, he can actually defend, the point of attack more consistently. He can switch, he can rebound. So I think they probably give him a shot back in the rotation to kind of see, even if it's not him as a perfect asset, if that role kind of unlocks a next level in our lineup. So I personally don't see him being traded, even though it's possible, to your point. But I do see some of our kind of backup guards, Christopher, Garrison, Daishen Nix, just given the crunch we have in the guard position, that they really should move position. They really should take the opportunity to look at. The second thing I was going to say was just regarding the cap space, right? It is unlikely that we are going to use our cap space on, marquee free agent signings all at once next summer, right? Maybe there's a nice player that we throw some money at that we think could be a good kind of veteran addition to our team. Miles Turner has come up as an example of that.
You're not on the James Harden plan?
I am not on the James Harden plan, but yeah, so someone like Miles Turner, maybe that makes sense. Someone like Fred VanVleet, right? Like, I don't see multiple of those guys, getting max contracts from us next summer to kind of, and so then what happens is you can use your cap space effectively in trades. Maybe there's a player now that you would have tried to go sign had they been a free agent in the summer, and you construct a trade around to go get now, even if they're on a longer term deal, right? And so that's why I don't know. There's just so many options that the cap space thing of like preserving it at all costs. To me, it's preserve it at all costs, but feel free to use it if there's people now that fit your long-term plans. It's not
I don't disagree. It's just you would have to be comfortable enough that it's better than your options over the summer to sort of foreclose those possibilities early. You should be open to it, sure. It would need to be a guy you feel pretty damn good about.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why I just think like we will see. I do think they will move some of these guys, to your point, but I think the summer will be kind of a mix of signing some guys, but keeping even more options open as well longer term. But that's how I'm viewing the trade market, and I think the roster. I mean, the last thing I'll say is the other complication is like, who are you likely going to get in the draft, right? If we're going to pick in the top 8 to 9, which is where we're in the range right now, a lot of those guys are wings. They're guys that could play, plug in at the 3, who can complement our guards, complement our bigs, and so that makes the roster crunch now even more pronounced. And so that's where I think they have to be thinking ahead. And they got in terms of who's likely going to be there. And the type of prospects that they're going to get as a way to say, hey, if we are wedded to these 5-6 guys, at least for the next couple of years, and we think we're going to get this type of player in the draft, what does it mean for the rest of the roster, and how do we set it up so that, we can surround our young guys with the right complementary, more experienced players?
Yeah, I think you make some good points. I think one of the guys that, currently is a fan favorite, but I think might fall into the same group of, this is one of the positions that you're going to more easily replace with a free agent, is actually Usman Garuba. Not just because, right now they're struggling to play everybody because they are playing him as a center, and he seems like, to the coaching staff, and this is not source, it's just me watching, he seems like kind of a nuisance in the sense of, we had an injury to Fernando, and he played so damn well that we have to play him now. But we kind of want to play Fernando because he's a love threat, and we keep mentioning that all the time. But we can't not play him. So it seems like there's something's got to give in that regard there, especially coming to next season. It might not be Fernando next season. You might go out and go after Nerlens Noel or someone like that. So I'd like to add Garuba to that.
Yeah.
And I also think it's a good market to do that, because there's a couple of teams that there's one team that just started the rebuild, which is the Spurs. And the Spurs are playing multiple players who are not part of their long-term future. And so that's one team, like when you have these lower-end prospects and you're trying to, trade them to get some level of asset back because you're not going to be able to play them all and they're not all going to pan out. Having a team like the Spurs, who is at the stage in their rebuild to a certain extent that the Rockets were when they traded James Harden mid-season, where they just, any talent that can come in will give it a shot, might be a team that's interesting, especially because they have extra first-round picks, although I'm not sure any of these guys we're mentioning would warrant the first-round pick. But that's one of those teams. I think everything's so balanced right now that, and with a draft this good, that we'll see a lot of teams blow up. We saw the Orlando Magic a couple of years ago when they traded Vucevic at the deadline. Right now, you've got, not Golden State because they don't really have a path to doing so, but Toronto is a team that could very easily pivot to a tank. They did it a couple seasons ago when they got Scotty Barnes. Chicago doesn't have their pick, but it's top 4 protected. They could pivot as well. Washington, I mean, it's been kind of clueless about what they're doing. They should have been doing this for 3 or 4 years now, but there's someone who could pivot into a rebuild. And then Utah, they're clearly like overperforming right now. If they reach the trade deadline as a fringe play-in team, they could very well blow it up as well. And when they blow it up, they have a lot of those older young guys type thing, like we had Christian Wood, in Lauri Markkanen, in Colin Sexton, in guys like that. They might be another team that would be interested in just whatever young talent they can get their hands on, because what they want to do is tank, and you might as well give those reps to a young guy like a Garuba or a Josh Christopher or a Tai or a Daishen Nix or someone like that. My question was going to be, do you see, and it's kind of changing the topic a little bit, but we're near closing time, so do you see the Rockets, everybody's placing us as a team that's trying to sell on Eric Gordon, perhaps sell on KJ Martin, perhaps even sell on Jae'Sean Tate, although I think because of his extension, he's only tradable January 15th. Do you see us actually, when trading those guys, packaging assets with them and actually trading for a better for a better player, and not have Eric Gordon be the best guy on the deal or KJ Martin be the best guy on the deal? Or do you think it's more prudent to just wait until the offseason and see what opportunities there are?
No, I really do think, to your point, the number of teams that are going to pivot, and the quality of role players that if they had to pivot would be on the market. I really do think there's an opportunity to go grab one or two that you think would be part of your next step in the next couple of years. And really at the trade deadline, you're looking at 25% of the season to manage, right? It's not like just because you get a better player back doesn't mean you automatically change your lottery odds. And so that I think they will be opportunistic. To your point around the number of kind of older, younger guys, that I like the way you describe it, that are kind of up the learning curve a bit, have had their first contract and will show value and can be better in a more featured role. So I think there's a real chance that they do that, just because A, we need to consolidate, B, other teams are going to pivot, and so it feels like a very liquid market to make something happen. Now, of course, it should, if those deals don't work out, if these teams don't all pivot, obviously they'll go in. Their default is let's go into the summer and see what we can do. It is more likely still at this point that dealing with our roster crunch will happen in the summer, just given the roster spots, the draft night deals, the flexibility you have to kind of move multiple players for fewer players. So, but I really do think that these inflection points around or the pivot points for some of these teams really do create some surprising deals.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, because the NBA is at a pretty rare point with so many things coming together. The parity like we haven't seen in a long time, and of course a loaded draft class in 2023, potentially one of the best ever, especially at the top. So you combine all of that, and there's more teams, I would say, that are unpredictable, much more than a typical year. So yes, if this was an average year, it's probably a quiet trade deadline period, but there's at least potential for a lot more volatility than we're used to, and the Rockets should be at least open to capitalizing on that if the deal is right. I think that's sort of the genesis of what you're saying.
Yeah, and the free agent class this coming summer.
Yeah, it's not great.
It's not great, right? Maybe Miles Turner is the most interesting guy because he's 27 years old and can help us in a position that we actually want. But the rest of the class is really quite uninspiring, or I don't think they'd be fits for what Houston is trying to do. So then that's why you look at some of these guys who are on contracts who potentially are now moved at some of these pivoting teams as options to use your cap space just 4 months early. So yeah, that's why I really do think there could be surprising deals, but to both of your points.
Fair enough. I think that's a good optimistic way to end this. Actually, before we fully close out, I'll let you wrap up by weighing in on the topic that Paolo and I went into earlier while we were getting you set up, which was the tanking versus short-term wins debate that has taken over Rockets Twitter the last couple of days. I don't need to say my piece again. Paolo's already said his as well. I'm curious your thoughts. I know you're a big believer in the 2023 draft class. However, it's also a unique spot because the Rockets are winning these games on the back of younger players like Jalen Green, like Jabari Smith Jr. It's not the Gary Bird and Eric Gordon stretch of a year ago. And so if you win a bit more than expected and guys like Jalen Green and Jabari Smith make this look like a lucrative destination for trade targets, free agents, whatever it may be, that's not all bad. To me, I'm not saying that clearly you go after short-term wins. No, it's sort of how you win. I also think that, there's something to be said for getting out of the rot of losing, and perhaps players develop a bit better, your young guys, if they're in a better locker room, the vibes are better, they come in ready to work. We've seen much more attention to detail on their defense lately. But at the same time, there is some math, even if it's small. Look, let's say you drop your odds of Victor or Scoot from 27% to 23%. That's not huge, but it's not nothing either. Or for Victor from like 14% to 11.5. That's not, huge, but it's not inconsequential either. How do you balance that? For me, it's small enough, and I see the other potential benefits. I'm happy that they won that game against Phoenix. I know many other people are less happy, especially because Phoenix was not at full strength. How do you sort of balance and contextualize those factors?
Yeah. I mean, a couple of things that have guided my perspective. One is this draft is truly deep. After Victor and Scoot, I think players 3 through, depending on where you cut it off, 3 through 7 or 8 are all probably the same tier. And it just depends on like which role you're looking for, what type of prospect you're looking for. But really, really talented guys that would be top 5 in every other draft that we've been, recently part of. And so between picks 3 and 8, I don't care where we finish. And so with that, I have a lot more peace of mind of like, let's let the chips fall where they may. And to your point, it's all been about the process. Like, are we featuring Jalen Green? Are we getting Jabari more involved? Are we winning on the back of, our young players playing great defense and offense to close games? Yeah, I mean, I do enjoy those wins. I think where there's been some interesting debate is like we seem to get these like unforeseen wins when teams kind of, whether intentionally or because of injuries, rest their players. But, I think all that math tends to even out at the end. And I think, where we are right now, which is picking 4th, is probably where we'll end up, regardless of these wins or losses. And so I haven't lost much sleep over it, just because I think there's been so much kind of conflicting views on the Twitter discussion. Like, is our coaching staff good? Well, now we're winning. So is our coaching staff good or not? Right. And then, well, now we're winning. Do we, what about the value of tanking? So then I think that the philosophy of this front office and coaching staff has been do not predetermine outcomes, right? As long as we don't sign vets and play extra vets to try and get wins. I think
that's
the
what I mean by
process
chasing wins. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's where I don't lose sleep over this right now, just because I think we'll end up right where we are right now. We'll have a great chance at both a top 2 pick, but also a really exciting tier of prospects that, by the way, would fit perfectly with Jalen, Jabari, and whoever else is in our starting lineup.
Yeah, and just I know I already talked about this, but just one last thing real quick about this. Well, the question becomes, well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to sit Jalen Green in the clutch? That doesn't seem like a smart decision. Like, people complaining about winning too many games. Well, what's the solution? Are you going to intentionally tell them to play bad basketball? That doesn't seem like a solution either. We're at that point where there's not many vets to pluck out of the rotation to make them play worse. So
yeah,
there's not much you can do to change the outcome of these games.
It's a classic Twitter debate rather than one that actually has any real meaning for the guys that are out there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the the last thing I'll say is I think we're in this weird part of the season where these types of things are happening. Like a month ago, we started the season 2-11, right? And it was we were playing everyone pretty much the same way as far as I can remember. But I think teams now are either more beat up. If you look at some of the injuries to some of the prior playoff teams, or I think to our point about both pivoting teams and contending teams, I think the intensity of the good teams will start to pick back up again. And so that's why I think it all evens itself out. I think to your point, we're never going to, at least this front office, I don't think will ever say we're not playing somebody. We're not playing a young player.
Right.
I don't think we're going to do what Oklahoma City has done. But I think but I think it'll even out. One way to do to kind of influence the outcome is to trade Eric Gordon. I think even though he's not the perfect fit, he has a stabilizing influence on the team in terms of the level of play. And then the other piece is to start to deal with the roster crunch too. So there's a number of things where I think they'll use the back half of the season to set up for next year, which likely will kind of shift us back towards where we started the season. But I don't think the guys on the court see any difference to what they're doing night in and night out.
Good stuff. I think we're in complete agreement there. And so with that, I think it's a good place to wrap up. Folks, if you are not already following Karthik on Twitter, again, I strongly encourage you to do so at StanfordKP. Again, his real name, Karthik Prasad, great Houston sports follow across the Rockets, Astros, and Texans. Karthik, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Paolo. And always great to do this, and appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. We'll do it again as we get closer to the actual trade deadline in February. With that, we'll wrap up. For Paolo, I'm Ben. You can follow me on Twitter at Ben Dubose. Follow Paolo on Twitter at PaoloAlvesNBA. There's also a cat in the background. So I think that's a good sign that we should probably wrap up. Anyway, if you want to follow this show, do so at The Logger Line. And of course, I want to thank again our sponsors at Karbach Brewing and Sports Talk 790. Follow them on Twitter at Karbach Brewing and Sports Talk 790. With that, we'll wrap up. For Paolo and Karthik, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.